right, welcome to Masculine Geek number 219. We are honored and privileged to have with us the grandson of Frankie Frazetta, and this is a night in the Frank Frazetta Museum with Frankie Frazetta. Welcome, sir. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah,
Pleasure
thank you.
being here. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, my girl and I were out in the Pocono areas in East Stroudsburg the end of March, and I said, you know what, I have to visit the Frank Frazetta Museum, and that's how we met.
Yeah.
So, and this is how all this is coming together. So, once again, welcome. And you were actually in the museum.
Yeah. Behind me are the originals: Death Dealer 3, Civil Warrior behind my head, Cat Girl, and then the Huns.
And Cat Girl, I've got a copy of that up here. Yeah.
I'll say that was his favorite piece by far. Actually, what's funny about that is I don't know if I told you during the tour, but after watching my parents, because I'm new to curating and everything, and new honestly to the Frazetta world, my dad told me recently that Sylvester Stallone tried to purchase Catgirl for $1 million back in 1977.
Oh my god!
Wow.
Yeah, so
I can't even wrap my head around that.
Yeah, but that was his favorite piece, like bar none. So that was when the settlement occurred, my dad wanted that more than anything. So
Wow.
that was his first take.
That's amazing. So get started. I know you sort of like having the tour here. So how did your grandfather get started with his art? Basically, how did that all come about? Because you did mention that he had a different love other than art.
Yeah, so growing up, he'd always been very adept at art. His talent was like he was naturally gifted. Even as a kid, his instructors noticed he had this like crazy knack for it, and his parents were kind of urged to enroll into an art college. It was the Brooklyn Bond Academy of Arts. So he was 8 and he got into that. They thought it was a joke, so they had him like draw a couple of they said like ducks, and he drew it, and the instructor was like flabbergasted that this 8-year-old was competing with all the other guys that were in the college. But yeah, his other love and probably his number one passion was baseball. He would always play stickball. My dad said whenever he had like deadlines due, if there was a stickball game organized, he would like drop the deadline and go play stickball versus actually paint. So yeah, baseball. And I don't know if I told you during the tour, but my grandfather was super confident. He was just one of those guys that he made a decision and he thought the decision was correct. And it usually, I mean, it was never anything like horrible, but he was just very like set and knew what he wanted. And when I was probably in my mid-teens, he asked me like the weirdest question. It was, did I make the wrong choice? Do you think I should have played baseball and then like gone to art, or do you think I made the right decision with pursuing art? And I was like, you're absolutely insane for even asking me that question.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'd say you made the right decision. Yes.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
Did he ever paint anything related to baseball?
He would paint himself. Actually, we have an original. Here, let me go grab it real quick. There is like a sketch of, I don't know who it is. It looks like him because most of his stuff looks like him, of playing baseball. So
you're saying he was a model for a lot of the male.
Yeah, a lot of there's a big debate online because he always said he never referenced things really. He never referenced any live models, nothing like that. He would never really reference anything out of a book. He's done life stills that were like copying anatomy books, and he's copied his like skeletal. Actually, I just found a hard drive, or my dad found a USB stick with 35 gigabytes of artwork that my grandfather did.
Oh wow.
And I went through it the other day, and there's actually sketches I'd never seen before, which I honestly find sketches I've never seen before. But there was stuff where he literally was drawing like all the muscle structures and skeletal structures. It was his anatomy sketchbook, which I had never seen before.
Oh wow.
But yeah, so occasionally he would snap photos of himself or Ellie and then draw them into the pieces. But yeah, that was very. It wasn't often that he did it, but occasionally. Even we have an African piece over here where he put like his wife's decorative spear into the piece, and it was like a gift for her and stuff. So,
wow.
I remember you showed us that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a couple huge arguments with like people always say there's no way he didn't reference anything, and it's like he did occasionally, but you also can't reference half the stuff in there because like in his age, actually, he never even knew the internet like existed. I remember before he passed away, we were in my brother's bedroom and I had my laptop, and I was like, "Oh, you want to listen to Sinatra or something?" And he's just like, "Well, I don't have my records over here." I was like,
Mhm.
"I can just Google it." And I played Sinatra on the internet for him. He's like, "What the hell?" He was like,
Mhm.
"You can just." He literally asked, "He's like, you can just search Sinatra and listen to any Sinatra song you want?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "I never knew that existed." So
Oh wow.
yeah,
There's something
so
to be said for that though.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the thing is like, so as far as referencing half of these things, these like you can't, because if you don't even know the internet exists, like you can get like, you know, any kind of like National Geographic book for the cats, but like for Conan the Barbarian and all these swords, like he didn't have swords at his disposal. He didn't have, as far as I remember, any books
Yeah.
that had like images of swords in them. The only books he ever really picked up were anatomy books or Dante's Inferno. Those are the only books I really ever saw him pick up.
Well, and his
Okay.
swords had such a unique look depending
Yeah.
on which piece it is. Even if he had some kind of book from the Royal Armory Museum in England, those swords, you know, it's not going to be a traditional Scottish claymore or, you know, a sword of someone in the British light infantry during the
Mhm.
Napoleonic era. His swords were uniquely his.
Yeah.
And uniquely fantasy driven, and had a look and feel and a majesty to them that,
Yeah. No,
you
without
know,
a doubt. They're definitely, again, the only things that I've seen, at least in the originals we have here, that are like referenced from life are a spear in an African piece and then a gun in the piece called Red Planet. He puts his, he had a P-38 and he put P-38 into the image.
My
Nice.
a P-38. Oh, the pistol.
Yeah.
Okay.
He loved his like he loved World War II era stuff because growing up in Brooklyn in like the 30s and 40s, um, like he would hear planes flying overhead. So that was kind of like his thing. That's what, like, not to say it was like nostalgic, but like that was his time growing up. So a lot of his guns. My dad loved German Lugers. My grandfather loved German P-38s. He had a 1911, like all that kind of stuff. And then he loved revolvers. He had a Colt Python that we still actually have. But
Wow.
I agree. You were talking
yeah.
about that. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Now, how the land that the museum is on was something that your grandfather and Ellie had purchased, correct? And has been in the family ever since.
Yeah, so in 1971, I think it was, they moved here from Brooklyn. They actually found this place because my grandfather had, there's like an invite to some kind of like art commission like event. It was a golfing event in the Poconos. So he came down here to attend the event, and he discovered that this place was like nice. It was quiet. There was nothing here, like legitimately nothing here. Even when I was growing up, it was kind of like a very like backwoodsy place. So they sold an original piece and then bought this for like $5,000 or something like that.
Oh
And then
wow.
it was 71 acres and it was owned by a church. The church ended up, a farmer passed away and the church got the was willed essentially the land, and then they sold it to my grandparents. So they've been here since 71. They moved to California to do a Ralph Bakshi movie, and everybody thought they were going to move out there because my grandfather was very popular at that time, and being in Hollywood would obviously help. And they thought that was like his people, and he discovered he didn't like it out there. It was too busy, too loud. He liked his quiet, so he moved back after 2 years on that.
Well, it's definitely quiet out there. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, again, I feel like a lot of his influence came from here, and like this was his. He would have done anything to protect his property. Like this was, he would have sold a lot of images in order to keep it. That's what he cared about the most, to be honest. Like I said, his paintings were more. I think I talked to you about it. Like painting for him was a way for him to put food on the table. It wasn't like, I don't want to say it wasn't like a huge passion for him because that obviously was, that was like who he was, but yeah, his art was literally just a way to make money. A lot of the images that you'd ever see of Frazetta are commissioned pieces. Most of the images, yeah, I mean, probably I'd say about 75 of the images in here are commission pieces. We have probably most of the non-commission, like family pieces. But yeah, for the most part. So yeah, he kind of used to just trade stuff away, even from cameras, back when he was a little bit older. So yeah.
Okay. I do have two questions in regard to the commissions, but before that, I noticed it's sort of towards the back, towards the pond area in the back of the museum. There's a sculpture of a lizard. Can you tell me what that's about? That's so cool.
So my dad owned a golf shop, and with the golf shop, he ended up opening up a mini golf. So that was actually one of the things that was on the video.
That was awesome. It fit very well.
Yeah, no, it all works. It definitely works and adds to the kind of like aesthetic of the place. But yeah, once he shut that down, he brought those back. There's a big turtle too, but that was my grandma's, so that was not from the mini golf. But yeah.
Okay. And you had mentioned about commissions. You would often wait to procrastinate like heartily and wait to the last minute.
Yeah. So again, he was all about like trying to think of the way to say it, or like the phrase for it, but essentially he didn't like painting. Painting was what he said was he would only paint if it was either raining outside or if he was bored. So if he was able to go out and play baseball or hang out with his friends, that came first. So he would wait till the night of deadlines or close to that, and then he would start painting. My dad said he would tuck them in before bed and say, hey, it'll be done in the morning. And my dad would wake up and these would be done, essentially. He said it was very rare that it took over like 2 nights to finish these.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and what would help the process is that they're all oil paintings, and oils take forever to dry, like hours at least to dry. So we'd actually bake them in the oven to speed the process up. So,
I remember you talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of times my dad said the oven.
Put them in the oven.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And again, he discovered so many different techniques in order to speed his painting up. He's painted on masonite instead of canvas. He actually, once he discovered masonite, he hated painting on canvas. So again, as I told you, with the masonite pieces, he had a deadline due the following day and discovered he had no more canvas. So he actually ripped through like the walls and the floors of his house and found like subflooring, and he painted on it. And awesome. It was masonite. Yeah, and it's a smooth texture, so you don't have to prime it like you do with canvas. And for the most part, unless you like did a full painting on it, then you have to prime it with what's called gesso and then sand the gesso down. But it allowed the paint to go on smoothly. You only had to do a layer or two of paint instead of like multiple. So again, now he's saving money with paints. He's saving time. So yeah, again, it was a lot of his stuff was at speed. He would always do speed paint to try to time himself to get faster and better. Because he wanted to go play like baseball or hang out with his kids. He was like a huge family guy. Even growing up, again, every time I walked in the studio, it was pretty much us and my Aunt Heidi's family until I was 10. They moved away, but up until that point, like we were all in his room, like bugging the hell out of him. At least one of us was in there, annoying him. So yeah,
that's great. That's great.
And it sounds like he didn't mind having the excuse to stop working because he had a grandkid or someone to play with, right?
Right.
I was gonna say, and at that point, that was when he became like left-handed painter because he has suffered all those strokes, and the one kind of messed up his right side to where he had no more fine motor skills. So he would occasionally paint, occasionally draw. We do have a lot of left-handers. But yeah, it was very rare that he spent a lot of his time drawing at that point. Like I said, we have a couple finished left-handers in here, but those usually took like years for him to do between us bugging him or him just wanting to do other things, or just the time it took him to actually do those left-handed. It took so long. But so
I got a question. So whenever he talked about his painting, what was his how did he talk about it? And what I mean by that is, did he talk like, I love doing this, or did he talk like, this is something I kind of like what you were referencing earlier, that he did it to pay the bills? But did he have any sense of like enthusiasm the same way, say, he would talk about baseball?
He didn't really talk about it, if I'm being honest. Yeah, it wasn't a discussion that anybody had with him. whenever we would draw something, like he would compliment it or criticize or whatever, even if we were like young, he'd be like, "Oh, you got to do this way." Or, I remember when I was a kid, he tried to get me to draw one time, and it was a pig. And I was doing the hooves. I like, you know how when you draw like pig hooves when you're a kid, it's like a W essentially. Yeah. He was like, no, that's wrong. You got to do it like this. And I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm like 8 years old. I don't care much. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure my brother did talk to him a little bit. Throughout my childhood, again, art was like grandpa's thing. Like grandpa was this crazy artist, but he didn't discuss it much. So it honestly wasn't like a big deal to any of us. He did occasionally talk about it. I'm trying to think. It wasn't super often. As far as talking about art, it would just be like more like showing a kid a piece of art type thing. It wasn't ever anything super in depth or about techniques. And even if like so fans would meet him occasionally, he'd be sitting outside on the stoop and they'd be like, because I used to work here when I was 10, I used to be a greeter. Yeah. My grandma would like pay some of the grandkids to like greet people in the museum. And he'd sit outside on the stoop and everybody would be like, "Oh my God, is that Frank? Can I go say hi?" I'm just like, "Yeah," like he wasn't mine. And they would ask him about art and he would just not talk about it. Like he would talk about cameras or baseball or anything other than art. So I don't know. Yeah. I know there's a couple people, my dad probably could answer that a little bit better. A guy, Dave Winowitz, could probably answer it a little bit better. My neighbor, who was one of my grandfather's best friends, they all talked to him about art. But yeah, as far as talking about it, I can't honestly remember many conversations where he discussed it. Yeah, and like that was the other thing too, is like he never looked at anybody else's art. He had his influences. Hal Foster was his like number one influence. Growing up, so growing up, he would read Tarzan by Foster, and he always like my grandfather's whole like goal when he was a kid was to be a comic artist. And he again loved Tarzan. That was his favorite character. He said he never wanted to do Tarzan though because Hal Foster had perfected him. He said I could never do Tarzan like Hal Foster did. So he wanted to go off and do other things. But yeah, so what's also funny about that is with the whole like comic stuff is that he wanted to get into comic arts, and he finally got his own comic after like years of doing like ghost art for other people or working with other people to do their own stuff. And when he got the lead in a comic, he hated it because he had to draw so much because comics take so much work to do that he like once he did kind of images, he said this is way better because I only have to do them in a night, and comics take like days and weeks to finish. But yeah, I genuinely, so again, like even looking at art, he had Foster, Krenkel. Roy Krenkel was like his best friend as far as art went. Krenkel actually was the whole reason he blew up in the book scene. Krenkel worked for Burroughs for a long time and would always ask my grandfather for help with his pieces if he was stuck. He always said my grandfather just knew what to do and like where to put things and how to color things. So if there was a piece he really couldn't figure out, he would have my grandfather help. So he'd submit all these pieces and tell Burroughs like, "Hey, you should hire him. He's like, he's really good." And they always would just say, "No, like he's not that great. We don't really care. We have everybody else anyway." And then apparently, eventually, he submitted a piece that was pretty much fully done by my grandfather, and they said, "This was great. You need to do more like this." And he was like, "Well, this is Frank's, so you have to hire him." So they hired him to do then all these book covers, comics and stuff. But yeah, so he had Krenkel, Foster, and then Jeffrey Catherine Jones, who was a painter. And he always said that Jones was the best painter he would ever see. As far as like painting, like with actual paints, he said I couldn't touch Jones. So again, it was very rare that he ever discussed things like that. But when he did, it was kind of not really comparisons to that artist, but a lot of like contrasts as far as like who was better at this and who did this better. But again, anytime I walked in his room, it was kind of just like, "Hey, do you want to watch like one of the movies we've seen 30 million times, which were either King Kong, the old King Kong, Dante's Inferno, or Night of the Hunter, or like Super Nintendo, or do you want to watch a Mets game?" Like he would paint. I'd walk into his room and he'd be like whiting something out on his easels because that's just what he did. And like he would show me how he's doing things, but like again, since it was like grandpa's thing, that was like art was him.
Mhm.
And again, it was like your way to put food on the table. So my dad was actually a really good artist too in his 20s. He was like really good. I think if he would have pursued it, he could have been not my grandpa, but he would have been very close. To be honest, he knew techniques. He knew like again, it's so funny looking back at his art when he was in his mid-20s, how good he was. But he would always paint these ants, like it was
Mhm.
like literally this like ant collection that he painted with grandma. And my grandfather was just like, I guess he took him under his wing and he said, "All right, it's time to like actually paint real things and take things seriously." And my dad was just like, "No, I'm okay." He opened up his own business and he was getting a good income from that, so he decided like putting his time into art wasn't worth it.
Okay.
So yeah, again, like there wasn't much as far as talking about art, really. None of us really cared much about it.
Well,
It's really
since you,
interesting. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, since you had referenced comic books earlier, one of the things I wanted to ask you is currently there are a couple of different
Mm-hmm.
Frank Frazetta comics that are published by Opus, Death Dealer, Dawn Attack. Some of them with your grandfather's artwork on the cover, some done by other artists, including, like, for example, this one, which features art by comic artist Frank Cho. And there's a new Frazetta comic that just came out today, as a matter of fact, which is New Comic Book Day. And these are all being done by Opus Comics, which is a fairly new publisher of comics. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. And is this something that is sanctioned and by your family and your family's for and has made agreements, or is this some thing where they were able to use the name and the artwork because of certain licensing issues with other people, or what can you tell us about it, and are we supporting Frank's family by collecting these and reading these, or are we making someone else rich on your grandfather's name?
So there are two Frazetta entities currently. There is the Frazetta Museum, which is us, and then there is the Frazetta Girls,
Okay.
which are my aunt and uncle. Frazetta Girls are doing the comics. So
Okay.
technically, the money is going towards them.
Okay.
As far as us, we are trying to work on comics. It is very hard to get in with people. I know my grandmother and grandfather had worked with Dark Horse for a very long time. Dark Horse, we were gonna work with 6 years ago. They had an idea we weren't super thrilled with, so we turned it down, and I think that kind of like muddied the waters a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, so it is we're trying to get comics out. It's just so hard to find publishers and all this other stuff. But yeah, so not us, but still Frazetta,
Okay.
in a way.
Have you
Yeah.
considered looking at the markets in France and Belgium instead of American comics, the bande dessinée from Europe and from France and Belgium? I think artistically, a lot of those European artists certainly share a similar aesthetic appreciation to the work that your grandfather did that isn't necessarily as prevalent in American comic artists, even not going to the fact that there's this whole generation of comic book artists that got their degrees from Cal Arts, and it's all the same, very, in my personal opinion, crappy, not quite poor, pale imitation of anime style looking artwork.
So
have you?
yeah, I was gonna say. So I've seen the covers for the books. I haven't really read them. I've
Okay.
heard mixed things about them. I also, as far as the art style they've chosen, each artist has their own style. Say it like nicely, it is not my style. There is one comic book artist that I love that we are friends with and have been in touch with. I think he did one of the covers, Tom Grinberg.
Okay.
I feel like as far as emulating Frazetta, he's very close. I actually talked to him a couple weeks back. He's always like super busy and kind of living life. So he's not, I wouldn't say as motivated and as quick as other artists, but he just like, it seems like he doesn't have a ton of time to do things. But I told my dad recently, and we were talking about doing comics, that if I had to pick somebody, Grinberg would be up there. And my brother would say Jusko, if we could get Joe Jusko.
Right.
like Bisley, any of those guys. They're obviously huge Frazetta fans, and I think their style better emulates my grandfather's than some of these other artists. And I like if we were ever to make a comic. And again, this is not knocking any of the other guys. They have their own style, and I feel like you said, the whole anime style that's kind of in right now, and that's what everybody likes. I mean, I'm a huge anime guy, so I get it. But as far as like paying tribute, like, again, Jusko, Grinberg, just all those guys, Bisley, they're the ones who would probably get as close as possible. Or like you said, any of the Europeans, I'm not aware of a ton of them who would do that. But yeah, I mean, there are, again, if I was going to choose, I would go somewhere that was very, very, like, I've seen their art, and I think it can get as close as possible to Frazetta's stuff. And again, everybody emulates him, and I've seen pieces, San Julian, something like that. He does very good Frazetta stuff usually. I've seen him do Death Dealer things. They're really nice. Pitar Maselja, I'm a huge fan of. He does a lot of Frazetta stuff. He's very good. So if I was going to pick somebody, it would be somebody who, when you look at it, you go, that looks Frazetta-esque. Like, that looks like something Frank could have drawn, or at least close to it. But yeah, so yeah, that's, again, my feelings are the same as yours. I wish they had taken it a different route as far as the artists go. And that's, again, I don't like to talk down on anybody. I just feel like their styles, they brought their own style into it, which is cool. Artists do that. That's great. I just don't feel like their styles really coincide with my grandfather's. He has a very unique style that's, I feel like a lot of modern artists struggle to really hit, because it's, again, nothing they practice and nothing that's popular currently.
No, the character of Death Dealer, that's an original of your grandfather's, right? Yeah.
So what's funny about that is, again, all these images were painted for somebody else. So Civil Warrior, that was done for a Michael Moorcock book. Catgirl was a Creepy magazine. The Huns was apparently supposed to be for the Conan estate, like way back when, but I guess the book never came out, so not a Conan piece. Yeah, so Death Dealer was a criticism. That was, everybody said my grandfather wasn't able to actually, like, he wasn't creative. He always did somebody else's character. So he wasn't like the creative artist that could do things himself. So he took that as kind of a challenge to create his own character. So he came out with Death Dealer. And what's funny is that Death Dealer 1 came out 2 weeks after Civil Warrior did. And my dad said that Civil Warrior kind of took a hit from that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, my dad's doing work outside. Just making sure I don't step in a ton of mud. But yeah, so again, Death Dealer was kind of that. Again, he didn't paint for himself really, unless it was rare that he would paint for himself or somebody else, unless he was getting paid. And Death Dealer was one of the rare occasions where he did paint for himself. There's a lot of whimsical pieces out there, a lot of African pieces, Eastern pieces. Those were all done for Ellie. And yeah, Death Dealer was him. He would do stuff for his kids. Very occasionally he did stuff for us. I don't think many of the grandchildren ever really asked him. I think once or twice they asked, or like they would do caricatures for us, or he would do caricatures for us. But yeah, so Death Dealer was his own creation, and obviously it's cool to see that since it was his own creation, like, it's blown up so much that it's his most popular character, and it's like funny that nobody thought he could create his own thing, and now it's like his most popular piece alongside the Conans, obviously the Barbarians, just because of that book.
I wanted to ask you about that too. I remember you talking about that he had not read Howard's work at all.
Yeah, so that's another huge debate online is did he like the Conan books, the Howard books?
Yeah.
He never read any of the books. Even in the stuff we ended up bidding on recently on the prelims, you could actually see like Twin Towers, page like 211, or Eowyn, page like 180, where his friends would actually read the books for him and then tell him what page numbers the characters were on. And then he would skim those pages, get the descriptions of the characters, and then paint them. He said Howard, for what he read, he was a great author, but he didn't really read anything other than the descriptive pages. He just wasn't. Yeah. And that's who he was. That's how he was. He never read the Burroughs books. Obviously, I just read some of them very recently, the past like month or two, and they're great books.
Oh yeah.
And it's so cool to see, like, I always look at all his like images of them. I'm like, oh, okay, that's Diane the Beautiful, or this is like David, or these are the Mahars. So it's cool to see like all these images he's drawn.
Yeah.
But yeah, he never read the books. He wasn't much of a reader. He was a sci-fi type guy, not much into fantasy. But even so, with sci-fi, it was just comics. It was never books. Again, the only books he ever read were like Dante's Inferno or Anatomy.
Okay.
You know what's interesting is the guy who did Solomon Kane, Howard's other stories. I have a copy of the stories, and the illustrator did a foreword, said, "I never read a single story."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like, I feel like hearing you say that, I was like, okay, I'm starting to see a pattern. Like one more.
I was gonna say.
Oh, so what?
No, I was gonna say. I feel like, again, when you get commissioned for something, it's kind of just like you're getting paid. Like, I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. And if that includes not reading the book and just kind of finding the descriptions, then
it makes
like,
sense.
You don't need to read the book to like
get
a description of characters and to paint them in a piece. Like, again, for At the Earth's Core, you have, I don't know if it's Diane the Beautiful or just any kind of like human, and then a Mahar next to her, and they were just like, oh, paint the Mahar in like water or whatever. Even with King Kong, like they just do like, this is what we want, and just do it. And that's just what he did. A lot of times his commissions got turned down, and he usually didn't care about that. As long as you gave him a reason, he just kind of laughed about the reason. But yeah, again, like with King Kong, he sent it out. Or Kong the Snake. You can kind of see it over on that wall there, that big thing. We sent that out, and there's a naked girl on it, and they're like, Frank, we can't use this for a movie poster. She's naked. And he was just like, well, you didn't tell me that when I started painting it, and it looks good right now, so I don't feel like redoing it. Awesome. So he just never redid it. Again, that's how he was. But as far as Burroughs, I don't think they really ever turned down any of his stuff. He always did, like, his Burroughs were so good. And it's crazy to see how many Burroughs pieces he did. Like, we have a piece called Mammoth, which is literally a guy with a spear, like, going after a mammoth. That was a Burroughs piece. I had no idea. At their core, obviously, Burroughs. Any of the Pellucidars are Burroughs. It's just it's nutty to see. And to, like, again, learning all these pieces, it's like Grandpa really didn't do anything for himself. Like, all these pieces were for somebody else, and it's kind of crazy to see that. I mean, that's just how he was as an artist.
It's almost like he, which is funny because it's an art, and art is usually like a passion or something like that. But it's almost like he saw it as working at like a tactile factory or a car where, I'm trying to think of like a car part where, I put the steering wheel on the car.
I built this carburetor.
I put the steering column on. I put the steering column on Ford cars, but there's nothing else to talk about. And yet he's creating these very artistically, aesthetically pleasing and well done pieces of art. And yet he doesn't. It seemed like he didn't look at it that way. He's kind of like what you're saying. He saw it as a way of making money, but like, how did he talk about other stuff in comparison, like baseball? Would he just sit there and talk your ear off about,
Oh my God. Yeah. He would always talk about like his younger years playing baseball and how he always like hit these home runs, and he like all he would talk about. So he was like an athlete first and a painter second. So like all he talked about were sports and playing stickball and baseball in Brooklyn, and he would get so enthusiastic and so into it. Whereas with art, again, he never art was a way for him to support his family. Not to say it wasn't a passion. Again, when he lost control or like that fine motor skill on his right side, my parents said he did kind of get very depressed because like he also identified as this crazy artist, but he identified as an athlete first. Even in his 60s, he was like this like very, very athletic guy, very intimidating looking dude. Even I saw a picture of him recently. I was like, holy crap. He was like in his 60s and he looked like this, or even like late 60s. Like, guy looks nuts. But so anything else, he would get like tell you all these stories, and he was so into them. Art, again, I can't. And like, it's funny, my brother and I would like recently, now that I'm So like growing up, my parents always said like don't get involved in the business. So I always think about my grandparents. They were, again, like I grew up with them across the field, so I was at their house every day. So they were I was very close to them. They were a very important part of my life. But you think of them as like grandma, grandpa. So like you think about the random occasions. You don't think much about like what you discussed, and like nothing specific. So recently, I was talking to my brother about it because again, it's nothing like my parents said. Stay out of the business. Don't ask questions. Like don't. So all my siblings went to school. My brother's a nurse. I'm a registered nurse. Like we all found our own way. And recently, my parents took me on board a little bit, at least. My brother helped out a lot too. But so I was talking to him recently about stuff, and like I brought up like the movies we used to watch, and he's like, and I mentioned Night of the Hunter. He goes, "You don't remember King Kong or Dante's Inferno?" I was like, "Holy crap, never mind." And like these light bulbs kind of like lit up.
Yeah.
I do remember those movies. I remember Dante's Inferno the most now, whereas it was Night of the Hunter before. We talk about like which Super Nintendo games he liked the best. I used to think, even I did an interview like a month ago with some guys that do a convention, and I told them like Super Mario. My brother was like, "No, I think it's called like Gold Runner or something." I was like, "Yeah, I do remember
That's
that."
awesome.
Yeah, because like even growing up playing Super Nintendo with him, he never played. He would always watch us play. So it was very rare to like see him play. He always wanted to watch. We played like Stinger, Battletoads, Chippendale Rescue Rangers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, like
That's awesome.
he would get so enthusiastic, or like guns. I shot my first gun with him, if I can remember correctly, and like super enthusiastic about that, or cameras. If you talk to him,
I was
about
just say
a
you were
camera,
talking about cameras,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Oh my God, he wouldn't shut up about them. He loved cameras. He loved tinkering with them. My dad said he thinks he liked just like tinkering with them more than he liked taking photos. He always said like the fact that you can capture a moment in time is the most like absurd thing in the world. So honestly, like cameras,
That's true.
yeah. So that was his other passion. I remember every day that we wouldn't be at his house, I'd see him walk across the field with the camera around his neck. And he didn't snap a ton of photos of us from what I remember. He would just screw with it and like just mess with the camera the whole time and like go through old photos or whatever. But yeah, anything else, he wouldn't stop talking about anything else he liked. Art, I don't know if he didn't talk about it because again, it was like his job. It's like talking about your job. Like, do you really want to talk about your job? Or if that was just kind of like a private thing for him and like for him only. But again, like,
what was his favorite baseball team as far as like year, like the 1927 Yankees or something like that?
As far as year, I have no idea. I just know he liked the Mets. That was all he would watch, the Mets. I would have to ask my dad. I think Mickey Mantle was one of his favorite players. Yeah. I remember my dad always bringing up Mantle. So I feel like Mantle was one of his favorites. Obviously Ruth was there, but Mantle was the name I remember.
And your grandfather was going to be recruited by one of the teams, right?
Yeah, they were the New York Giants when he was recruited.
Right.
San Francisco Giants. So, but they were offering like $3,000 a year, and you'd have to travel essentially. And he said, no, it's not worth the money. So he stayed here, but he was in his, I think, late teens when he got recruited to play professionally. But yeah, so again, it's funny because if you look up a picture of my grandfather, like that's not an art. Like he doesn't look like an art. Like, what you think this guy would look like at all?
Yeah.
He looks like his work.
Yeah,
he does.
At least as a reference to his work, he looks like a character from his artwork.
Yeah. So a lot of times he would implement himself into his pieces, especially in his earlier comic work. You always see his men look like burly Italian Brooklyn guys, and that's what he looked like as well. I know a lot of comic artists do that. There's a guy recently, I can't think of his name, but there was like an article I read. He does like a lot of Superman stuff, and he's got like crazy jawline, and he would always put his jawline onto his superheroes. But yeah, my grandfather, again, there's a piece Red Planet where literally it's like him. I remember seeing a photo of him in the same pose with his 1911, and then he painted himself into it with a little bit more muscle, and then he put his P38 in instead of.
I remember you showing me that one.
Yeah. But yeah, so a lot of the men look they look like him. Even Death Dealer, like under the helmet, obviously we don't know what's under there, but he painted Death Dealer in he was essentially Death Dealer. We have Death Dealer 3, which is that way. The one underneath it is 3. The one above it is revised. He did 3. 3 looks like a more cachexic, more like skinny, weak death dealer. And he was suffering from thyroid disease for 8 years. They had no idea what it was. And he lost all this weight. He felt super weak. He was in Mayo Clinic. My dad said for like 2 years. And he identified again as a super like crazy athlete, even in his late 50s, early 60s. So that took a lot away from him mentally. So he painted this death dealer to be more skinny like he was. And then once he got on medications for it, he literally painted over it. And then it made him more like menacing, burly death dealer, kind of saying like, hey, I feel better. Like, I'm embarrassed to show you what he used to be because I don't want you to know what I used to be. Right. So yeah, and that's what he did with a lot of his pieces. He always, like, most of his men look a lot like him. And again, I feel like a lot of artists do that.
Yeah.
No.
And the women, as far as like models, who are they?
So that's tough because I asked my dad that recently because I said, what is with his women? They all look very ethnic as far as like body shape and everything. And Ellie, his wife, was the most petite Irish girl you had ever seen in your life. Like, blonde hair, blue eyed, very skinny. And my dad just said that's because my grandfather liked the natural beauty that a lot of these ethnic women had because they didn't wear a ton of makeup. And back in his day, a lot of Caucasian women, like, makeup was the thing in the 50s and 60s and stuff. And my grandfather was all about natural beauty. Anything in nature was beautiful to him. Even, like, obviously he paints a lot of naked people, men, women alike. None of it was sexualized to him. He just loved the human body. Everything about it was interesting and beautiful. And the fact that, like, this came out of nothing, like these, like, human, like, all these anatomical structures and stuff. But yeah, as far as the women, he would use Ellie in a lot of their poses and stuff. Ellie was honestly most of the women. He would just add a little bit of bust to them because again, Ellie was like this tiny. She was so small. But yeah, so as far as that, I think just from the anatomy books and stuff that he would read, he would get kind of influences from that.
Okay, and you were saying too that he. Go ahead, Robert. I'll ask the next question after yours.
Well, I was just curious. Is Frank Frazetta Jr. Enterprises, is that connected with your side of the family, or is that with your?
Yeah, so that's us.
Okay, so then you guys are connected with the Savage Crucible action figure release that's releasing the Warrior with ball and chain. So, which I shared that image with you, Vince, on your Twitter PM. So, if you want to share that with the audience, but that's a recent Kickstarter that had just wrapped up, which featured a character from your grandfather. So, did you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So there's a guy, William Post. I think he's a retired cop. Super nice guy. He was just interested in doing a Frazetta figure. And it's cool because nobody uses Warrior Ball and Chain. They all want Conans and Death Dealers and stuff, which not to say it gets old, but I like to see other images being used because he has so many interesting ones. But yeah, so the Kickstarter actually did super well. I'm so thrilled to see it do that well. And again, Will's such a cool guy and like such a nice guy that it's always good to see these guys be successful. I think their goal was like 120 and they hit close to like 500. So they did a really good job.
Yeah, it funded pretty quickly.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was like the first day it funded. I think it was nuts.
And I'm sure it's no surprise to guys who know me. Yeah, I'm involved with it and contributed and have some figures coming. Not that you can tell from this background that I collect things, but so there you go.
So and like it's cool because I wasn't sure at first how it works. Like it was literally just a Warrior Ball and Chain thing, but it was cool that he had like other figures in the line as well, and you had to pledge to get Warrior Ball. But I think that was one of his biggest pledges was Warrior Ball and Chain, which is really cool. Again, it's like so interesting, so like cool to see that instead of kind of like falling off, my grandfather's only getting more and more popular as the years go by. Honestly, it's like I'm super thrilled to see that because my family, all we want is for his legacy to kind of live on. Obviously, that's the whole goal. That's why we keep our art. We're buying art back now. That is the goal. Is to actually we're building another edition on the museum to then put because we have so many pieces that we can't fit them all in here. Our walls are literally like some of our walls are from the ground up filled with art, and there's so many cool pieces at your foot, like at your feet, that you can't even see them half the time. So yeah, like, and all of these things goes towards putting like new things in the museum. Either it's new pieces or the additions or allowing us to do other things and fund other projects. So yeah, Warrior Ball and Chain was one of them, and that was a very recent one. I'm so thrilled that it did well for Will. Again, I think we did something else with him as well, but we've always done super well with him. He's always done a great job with things. There are some other guys where it's always kind of an issue with either it takes them forever to create the thing, or it never comes out, or it's delayed or whatever. But he's just so on the ball with everything, and he's so professional. And like, yeah, other people sometimes it's like payment takes forever to get there, or they want to pay you in goods rather than like royalties or whatever. And like sometimes that's okay, but if it's like a niche that we know it's not going to sell, it kind of sucks. But Will like immediately overnights everything. And again, it's just like, it's never a fight with him. It's always a great, I can't wait to work with him on more projects actually. And again, the amount of support that one's gotten and popularity it's gotten, especially in the figurine community, is nuts. Because his company it's not huge. It's not like Mezco or anything. And it is reaching guys like Four Horsemen and Mezco. Like, they all know about it, which is sick. It's so cool.
Well, and they all kind of talk positively about it too. So that
did they? That's good.
Yeah. And have compared their product to each other and how compatible it is. So that that collecting community.
Oh yeah, you guys are a little crazy with that stuff.
Yeah, very, very passionate, very vocal about their support. Obviously, as a matter of fact, you can see some Mythic Legion figures on display back.
I would say I spoke with them recently too, and I'd like to do some stuff with them, but currently we have some other projects going on, and they feel like the market's a little saturated, so they want to wait till it's a little more died down. But the last convention I went to, actually, it's called Zillocon, which it's got Mike Zolotoro runs it, and he's done actually. He does like retroaction figures, and he just did some for us. And Four Horsemen were there, or Mythic Legions, and they had this line out the door, and I was like, I got to meet these guys and like talk to them. And they're like, oh yeah, Frazetta, like we know you guys. Like if you ever like we start again, we connected. But hopefully, eventually, it'll be in the books to work with them, because I know a lot of people. They said a lot of people take their horse and put like Mezco's Death Dealer on it. Because nobody makes a Death Dealer on a horse yet. It's really hard apparently to get one of those guys going, because they're so large, but super nice guys. And everything they do, again, right when I saw what they create, I'm just like, holy crap, I gotta like at least give them a business card and say hi, and just let them know we're here if you ever want to work with us. But yeah, Mythic does great stuff. And again, it's so cool. I was never big into figurines for the most part. My nerdiness stems towards like video games or even card games.
It's a generational thing. Guys like Vince and I grew up with G.I. Joes and stuff like that.
G.I. Joes, He-Man figures, things
like that.
Hey,
you grew up with G.I. Joe, TJ? Well, you're like what, 14? There you go. No.
Hey, that works. No. But yeah, so I went to convention and seeing all these figures, like, holy crap! Like that's another thing I'd get into, or like have to pay money to, or even my friend just got into Warhammer, and that's an expensive.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
We do live stream paints too, and that's Warhammer is something Rollo does.
Yeah,
I was gonna say my army just got nerfed, so I have to build another army. I can't wait.
Yeah,
I'm like $1,000.
I'm more BattleTech than Warhammer, because not that that can't be expensive, but I think with Warhammer you're almost you almost spend less money on.
Well, you're paying for the damn name too.
Warhammer figures, so it is very, very, very pricey. So.
Oh yeah, no. It was all like, you have Magic the Gathering that people call like cardboard crack because it's expensive and addicting.
Oh yeah.
And then you had Warhammer, like us Magic the Gathering players, we look at like the Warhammer guys playing on tables and just be like, those guys are nuts. Like they spend so much money on these little figurines, and now I'm into it. I'm just like, I'm one of those crazy guys that paints little plastic things and pays $80 for like. So yeah, huge into Warhammer now. But like I said, what's actually sick with Warhammer too is that I think even before I played it, somebody brought something up to me that there were 3 artists that Games Workshop turned into gods. Mine are chaos deities. Mm-hmm. My grandfather is one of them. So he actually has.
Oh, you were talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So his name is Frazetta. It's PHRAZ-ETAR.
That's awesome.
So the really cool thing about it is it's like I always thought it was one of those like cool non-canon like whatever things, you know what I mean, like kind of like an homage to Frazetta. Mm-hmm. And then I was reading a book. So my faction, I like playing the vampires. I always grew up in love with vampires. My grandfather loved kind of like the Frankenstein vampire type stuff. So growing with that, I remember as a kid, I always was Dracula in like Halloween until I was like literally until I stopped going Halloween and trick or treating. So I chose the vampires, and I decided to read some books about the lore. And in the one, they're trying to resurrect this, like, it's called the Red Duke, which is like this insanely powerful vampire. And the sacrifice, they said, like, they need to sacrifice somebody to the god Frazetta. And I was like, this is actually like kind of canon now. Like his god literally having people sacrifice to him to res a vampire.
That's pretty cool.
It was like the coolest thing ever to see. I like showed all my friends. But again, it's so funny to like be into this stuff now, especially because growing up, my grandfather was not a nerd. Like didn't play D&D, he didn't read like comics much other than like Tarzan. But even then, I don't remember him picking up much like many comic books. Definitely, again, his only video games he ever played really were Super Nintendo, but really that was just because he was older and couldn't really play baseball much anymore. So, not a nerd in any sense of the word, which you would think he would have been one of the biggest nerds in the world because of what he draws and what, like, even right now, Gerald Braun, who is one of my favorite artists. It's actually funny. I ended up reading a book recently called Slewfoot. I found it on a website called Reddit. Somebody was talking about Slewfoot. I was like, oh, that sounds like an interesting read. One of my favorite movies is called The Witch. And this was essentially about a witch who like makes a deal with like the devil and yada yada. So I bought it and I read it, and it was by a guy named Braum, and he did his own art in it. I was like, this art's gorgeous. Like, this art's so good, and it reminds me. And I was like, I feel like I've seen this guy before. And then recently, Diablo 4's beta came out, and I was playing it, and my brother came in, and he was like, oh, like, what's really cool about Diablo is there's this artist, Gerald Braum, who did the art. His one son did dungeon design, and the other one did music design. I was like, oh, I just read a book by Braum. He goes, yes, like, that is the same guy. I was like, no way. And he's like, oh, I used to talk to Braum. Like, he's a huge fan of Grandpa's, and we would like message back and forth occasionally.
Oh shit!
And just like, holy crap, these guys that like I love, who like he's a great author and artist. So it's like so cool to see these things. And again, like those guys, a lot of the time they do like this kind of stuff. Again, Braum obviously likes some kind of like games and stuff, but my grandfather, nothing. It's like, it's so weird. He never talked about anything nerdy.
That's crazy. No, I wanted to get into a lot of the technique that you were telling us about. We're out there at the museum that your grandfather did, especially with certain colors and almost lighting, where he wanted to have the viewer's eye go to a certain portion of his painting.
Yeah. So that, I feel like in all of his pieces, they kind of look the same in a way. They always have kind of like something that somebody's standing on, like kind of a mound, and then you have the subject matter, and then the background is very abstract. He was very much a perfectionist with his subjects, and his whole goal in his pieces was to make sure there were no distractions and that like your eyes sat on one part of it. I think I was telling you, even now, it's like so hard for me to look away from what he wants you to look at. A lot of that, I feel like there's a couple of reasons behind that. One is it helps with obviously the speed of painting things. If he didn't have to paint a completed background, then he did it faster. A lot of people say his pieces look incomplete, which they do for the most part because he never finished backgrounds. But I think it helps. It adds to kind of your mind's eye and allows you to fill in the blanks. And also, again, it takes away from the piece. And a lot of other guys, you look at their art and your eyes go everywhere. You're looking at a million other things, and it's so complicated, so busy that you don't really get to focus on the important part of the piece. So yeah, his whole goal was always to get your eyes to focus on what mattered, and the rest kind of just went on like by the wayside. Didn't really care much about it, but I do feel like a lot of that had to do with the fact that he just wanted to do anything other than paint, and if he could get a piece out and get paid to do the piece, and all he had to do was paint a subject and leave the background empty, that was good. But again, I also think that like as an artist, he thought that was kind of interesting to allow everybody else. Again, for Civil Warrior, how there's like no reins that way.
I wanted to mention that one. Yeah.
You would have like you don't notice your mind fills those reins in, and that's just what he did. He didn't like distractions. Again, with Atlantis, where he was repainting it because he put a blade on a halberd and made the volcano like red. Like, that's the whole reason he changed it. It's like it's insane to think about stuff like that. And again, the second one looks better because your eyes aren't following anything else. Like you're not distracted by anything other than the subject matter.
Yeah.
Then it also makes the pieces cooler to look at. Like if you come back, you'll look again and be like, I never noticed that. A lot of people will come back a second time and ask like, oh, is this a new piece? And it's like, no, it's been there the whole time. Like you notice each piece like looks different the second and third time you look at them.
Yeah.
And again, every day I see them, there's something new I can find in every piece. Like he puts a lot of Easter eggs in his pieces. There's one called Temptress, where there's like a girl laying supine on her stomach and like a devil kind of like coaxing her over. And all you do is stare at the devil and her. But if you look in the background, there's like these little gnomes kind of like looking over logs. It's like, or another cool Easter egg is in a lot of his like creepy stuff with tombstones. So there's a piece called Beyond the Grave and another one called Tales from the Crypt. He would actually, on like the way he would sign it and copyright it was he would sign the tombstone and put his name on the tombstone and then the copyright year on the tombstone as well. So no actual like, Frazetta signature on it. It was just kind of his name and the year. But he always liked to do weird little Easter eggy things with his pieces. Made it kind of a lot more interesting for the kind of the more observant viewer, I guess.
That is cool. Hey, you were mentioning too that especially with anatomy and drawing figures, male and female figures, he hated clothes.
Yeah, so that was another reason to paint everybody naked was clothing. So again, he didn't use references, and to try to think of the way like a piece of clothing would be folded and wrinkled and how shading would work, that's very complicated to try to figure out in your head. And clothing took a really long time to draw, so that also took away from it, and it took away from like the anatomy. Again, he's known to be this crazy anatomically correct artist. Like his anatomy is very close to like realism. Some of his pieces obviously are a little embellished and exaggerated, but for the most part, he's like super on point with his anatomy. So if he put clothing on things, it just kind of took away from that, his style essentially. I mean, Death Dealer obviously is fully armored, but that was more like a mysterious thing. And then unless somebody commissioned him and said they have to have clothes on, clothing was not really something he liked to add into his pieces. Again, it's kind of complicated things, and it took too much time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, I was reading in one of the I think it was in the book cover art, the Battlestar Galactica. The posters are one of the books. Originally, the one woman that's when you're looking at the piece of art on the right hand side, she's kind of crouched over. She was originally naked, but later on they had to go back in. I mean, I don't know if your grandfather did it or someone else did it. They put a halter top and hot pants on her.
So a lot of times, there's one Princess and the Panther actually. It was done for a heavy metal piece, and they had to put clothes on her. They went in and painted the clothing on her. For their magazine cover because they couldn't put a naked woman on their magazine cover. The only instance I can think of that my dad's talked about where he's gone back and put clothes on himself, like him, is a piece called Stranded, where it's a guy on like a planet with like creatures around him. And the first iteration of it, he's like the guy is unclothed, and the second version, he's got clothes on. And my dad always said, like, I don't know why he did that. It's not like him to do that. But yeah, so a lot of times it was publishers that would have an artist go back and kind of add clothing to the pieces, so they didn't publish anything with nudity on them. I don't know if my grandfather ever really touched up any of them.
He probably didn't care.
No, again, it was just something that. Again, a lot of his pieces that were commissioned, they would say, "Oh, this needs to be changed," and you kind of just shrug and say, "I don't really care. Like, if you want it, take it. If not a big deal. I'll go off and like do something else." Like, he had so much work that it wasn't really anything he was focused on.
Yeah.
Now,
And he did. Oh, good, Robert.
Oh, I was just going to say, you've talked a lot about how much, the art was just a job for him and everything. But I also get the feeling that after his strokes and it drastically limited what he could do you think that's when he finally appreciated what a gift he had, or how special his artwork was? Because I know I completely understand it was just a job. I mean, there are musicians, there are other artists throughout history that it was just a job. I mean, even the Moody Blues, I'm just a singer in a rock and roll band. Everybody's like, there's such deep, meaningful things in your lyrics. And they're like,
Yeah.
no, I'm just a musician trying to make a living. I can't answer your questions about the war.
Don't stop reading into it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, I'm just a singer in a rock and roll band. I'm just a guy who paints book covers or whatever to feed my family, to buy a house for my wife and kids. And that's it. But when he lost that, or had that kind of taken from him, or greatly diminished, and he had to kind of retrain himself to try and do that, do you think then he kind of appreciated what a unique gift, or I hate to say it that way, because it makes it sound like it's divine, and he didn't actually do any work at it. He certainly had the talent, but he obviously worked at that talent,
I still don't think he did, because in his later years, again, he would trade. There was this one guy that would come over all the time with a camera, and he would trade my grandfather a camera for like a sketch or a watercolor. And these watercolors were worth thousands, of which now are worth like tens of thousands. Back then, thousands, and he'd trade that for a camera worth hundreds. So to him, he always knew he was good. That was one thing. Again, like, it was he knew who he was. He knew as an artist how skilled he was. Again, as he always said, with anatomy or like dynamics, I was the best. But as far as like, again, with Hal Foster, he was the best at Tarzan, or Jeffrey Catherine Jones was the best painter. So like, he had confidence. He knew who he was. He knew he was good at it. But I don't think, like, I'm sure he thought about it and said, like, man, it sucks that I can't draw like I used to. Like, I used to be so talented and all that. But I still don't think he valued his art much. It was never, the whole reason his art wasn't kind of just thrown away was Ellie. Like, his wife was the reason that he became as popular as he did. She pushed really hard to get him to where he was. She valued his art because she was an artist herself, and she was actually like, from what she did, from what I saw, there's only like one or two pieces I've ever seen her do. She was good. She's very good. So the fact that she saw these pieces that he would churn out in like 8 hours that were like masterpieces to like a third party, but to him, he just didn't care. But yeah, so it just, I don't think he really ever valued much, like, he never really put a number on it. Everything wasn't worth a ton to him. So I genuinely don't believe that he really looked back and said, I'm like, I don't think so.
It's interesting.
You were mentioning before we started the broadcast that you were getting back 2 pieces to listeners?
So there occasionally, and by occasionally I mean once every couple months, there are original Frazettas going up to auction, and 9 of them went up actually in one weekend. I think like 11 or 12 went up, maybe 13, but 9 went up that we're bidding on in one day, and we ended up winning 2 of them. And that's obviously all thanks to the support we get on our website and the museum. And the goal now is, like, our first couple of years at the museum, we were not doing too hot. It was a struggle between after getting the art back, we had to deal with lawyers to get our art, so paying them back and everything. We were underwater for a while, and recently we started doing really well. And So now we want to like give back to everybody. So now we are saving as much as we can towards the end of the year. The museum's not cheap to keep open, but whatever we have left over, we are putting back. So yeah, about 2 pieces. They are, I think my brother's gonna make a post about them this week, but there are Lord of the Rings prelims. So one has 2 images of Gandalf, and the other one has some Orc-eye.
Cool.
So yeah, again, I wanted to buy all of them. So my mom said, this is the number. She pretty much said, I don't care, buy them if you want. We should be able to afford most, if not all of them. But whatever your dad says, if he says it's not worth that much, don't buy it. So I had my dad sitting there. He's just like, no. So there were 2 of them that he kept saying, like, go. Other ones, there was definitely one guy who had like max bids on everything, because every time you'd bid, it was immediately outbid. So a lot of them we kind of just gave up very quickly, because it's like, obviously somebody really wants these guys, and we didn't want to use all of the money we had at our disposal to get these pieces in case something else comes up.
Right.
But yeah, so it's exciting. Again, I wasn't super involved in the art until recently, and now that I am, it's definitely like my own goal is to have like a Frazetta collect, like more Frazettas, like Frazetta collection. But yeah, so I'm super thrilled about these. I keep telling my dad every night, I'm like, man, I wish we would have bought more. And he's just like, something else will come by that will be like, because the Lord of the Rings stuff is cool. Don't get me wrong, I love the Lord of the Rings stuff, but like it's not Frazetta-esque. So it would be cool. I definitely want to get like a prelim or a rough that he's done, which are like these gorgeous watercolors. Honestly, I think some of his like roughs look better than the originals. He was not a lot of people know he loves watercolors. Like he loves watercolor and like whimsical things. So when he did his roughs, they were all like watercolored or oil wash. And oh my God, his watercolors are gorgeous pieces. So all these roughs are like gorgeous watercolor and stuff. And like in most of his arts, again, they're very like earthy tones and stuff. And in the watercolors, they're just vibrant blues and purples and greens and yellows, which is, you don't come across a lot of that in his works.
Yeah.
So yeah, although recently I just checked, in 2015, his prelims were selling for like 25 to 30,000 for these like tiny prelims. So we have one that we have on the wall. I don't know if we have any other like roughs that are actually watercolored, but again, it's like there's such gorgeous pieces to look at, because it's not Frazetta-esque, but it's cool to see like what those pieces turned into, because that's what he would do. He'd quick rough it up, watercolor it, and then kind of make the full piece. But yeah, just super, super cool to see those. But yeah, so again, anybody watching this, thank you very much for allowing us to purchase the art back and put it back where it belongs, because it's very important. Again, every time I see a piece sell, it's super cool to see him break records with them. Barbarian just sold for 8.5 million a couple years back, which honestly was very low in my opinion. It went through a broker, not auction, so it definitely sold lower than it should have. But it's great to see him making these strides for fantasy artists to show like, hey, fantasy art's worth as much as fine art. But it sucks because like it's part of my grandfather that we're probably never going to see again. And growing up, their motto, Ellie always said, art isn't just for the rich. She hated when guys would buy art and then just hoard it and not show it to anybody. They did sell art. That's not to say they didn't. I know George Lucas owns a couple of pieces they sold to him back in the 80s. We actually have a letter from Lucasfilm saying like, thanks for selling this to George. Like, please let him know when the others are being sold so he can buy them.
That's
so. But and my grandfather always said, like, if I wanted to be rich, I would have just sold everything. Again, Stallone offered him $1 million back in '77 for Catgirl, which is a ton of money back then. It's still a ton of money now. And he could have sold it and retired at that point, but instead he wanted to show that piece off to people. So that is the goal here, is to show it off. We love talking to people, giving tours. Even we don't advertise the museum. There are no billboards, nothing. And my dad said that's because we get so busy in the summer months that if we advertised, we wouldn't have any time to actually talk to guests and answer questions and really get the story behind the art.
Well, that's what I appreciated when I visited. I walking around the museum with you and having you just what you're doing here now with us. It was like almost 2 hours.
Again, I like again, growing up and being told like, hey, go do your own thing. This wasn't anything I focused on. Again, it was grandma and grandpa, but now I'm into it. It's like it just brings me all like nostalgic joy of like that was my childhood. It was my grandparents. Again, there was only 2 families essentially that lived next to them, and then my aunt Heidi was the second family. They moved away when I was 10, and then it was just us for the next 8 years. And we were a very tight knit family. We would be over there every night for dinner, or they'd be at our house. That was just what it was. My grandmother would, even if she was at our house though, at 7 o'clock, she'd be like, I have to be home at 7 o'clock for my Wheel of Fortune. And she'd go home every night. She had to watch it. But otherwise, they were just like, that was it. So like now that I'm helping my parents out and getting involved in the Frazetta stuff, it's very interesting. And again, I love talking about it because it's like all these bottled up memories that I love sharing with people, because nobody knows the artist behind the work. So again, my dad was my like they were inseparable. My dad was with him every day of his life for 55 years. I think my dad was when my grandfather passed away. And they did everything together. And
that's great.
Yeah. So, but when they passed away and we got the business, it was all kind of like the Frazetta name was kind of like stomped on. It was a bad kind of split, which usually tends to be the deal when artists pass away, their family fights and yada yada. So my parents kind of went silent and they decided to run the museum. They didn't want to brand out. They never really talked to anybody about anything. So all these stories, like I'm thrilled to be able to like talk to people about them. And again, every time my dad's in here, he comes in usually around like 1-ish. He's on what we call artist time. He's never really in here super early. When he's in here, I love listening to him give tours. His tours are unbelievable. I aspire to give tours like him. I'm trying and I'm getting there. Again, I have my own memories, but some of the tidbits and like the weird information, like stuff he knows about my grandfather is absolutely insane. It's just crazy to hear some of the stories he tells people. And again, I try to, whenever he gives a tour, I try to listen and then I try to remember that from my tours following it. Again, with the Burroughs thing where Frankel essentially submitted a piece of Frazetta art. I didn't know that. My dad told me. And then, so the African piece I was telling you about that he sold, it was my grandmother's piece. He sold it for the property. My dad said that he was like 10 or 11 years old, and my grandmother brought him in a room with my grandmother and my grandfather, and she said, "You are the witness to this." And she shook hands with my grandfather and said, "He has to paint me another African piece after we sell this." So I had thought that he sold it behind her back, but it turns out they agreed on it with the stipulation that he painted her another one. My dad said it took him 25 years to finish the other one. She would pester him every Christmas and like every holiday. They're like, paint me another.
So you weren't exaggerating about him procrastinating.
Oh, no.
25 years to make that deadline.
That makes me feel better about myself.
No, and that's how he was. He just like genuinely, if he could do it. So he told my dad too. He said the reason I chose art was that I could work when I wanted and I can play when I wanted. It wasn't like you have to paint for
that
like
makes sense.
6 hours a day. It's just get it done and you can do whatever the hell you want. My dad would tell me all the time that across the street they would have people come over to play stickball, and my grandfather would like drop what he was doing and go play stickball. And my grandmother would get super mad because you have stuff to do tomorrow. But he didn't care, and he could get it done. So that's just what he cared about. But again, just like my dad, it's tough for him to talk about his dad because again, they were so close. When he passed away, it was like a huge hit to everybody. It was horrible for our family. But
yeah, to us, a legend had passed, but to you, it was your grandfather. To your father, it was his dad.
Well, it was also something that was part of someone's life every single day, and then it's gone.
Yeah. And it was that like after Ellie passed away, it was just like everything kind of hit the fan very quick. We all knew what was going to happen. It was a big issue. I wish I could talk about the day that she passed away. It was one of the most crazy days of my entire life, and it was just again the stuff that my dad went through after Ellie passed away and my grandfather passed away was absolutely unbelievable. And the fact that he still like pursued and fought as hard as he did to get his like this artwork in the museum, and the fact that this is still his passion, honestly, it would have turned a lot of people off. What happened to him, and I can't say I would have done this. I probably would have sold everything and called it quits. and just said, screw it, I don't really care. But he loved his father so much that he literally, like, we put everything on the line to get this museum. And thankfully, we were able to get the pieces because of a very, very good lawyer who decided to do things pro bono for the most part. We owed her money afterward, but like during the fact, again, we didn't have a lot of money back then to fight because trying to think of the best way to say it, but essentially he was pushed out of the will. We had to fight for the pieces, and there's stories online about like my dad being arrested because he broke into the museum and like stole art and all this other stuff. But with that whole thing, we actually had a notarized document from my grandfather saying like, hey, if you notice things going missing in the museum, get everything, hide it, and divvy it out. And we noticed things going missing. So we all broke in. I was like 16 when we did it, so I didn't get arrested. But we got in, we took everything. Dad got arrested, so he was in jail for a while. That was a huge story online for the longest time of like Frank's son's trying to steal all the art and stuff. And it was like genuinely because a lot of pieces immediately after Ellie died, the Berserker was sold. And Ellie never wanted to sell that. There were a couple pieces they would sell, a couple Ellie never wanted to get rid of. Berserker was one of them, but it went to a good dude. Kirk Hammett, the guitarist of Metallica, bought that one.
Right.
So he's showing his artwork off for the most part. He did his own gallery and stuff, which is great.
That's cool.
But yeah, so a lot of pieces were sold off immediately after she passed away, and then right after he died, it was just like everything went. There's probably 10, 15 pieces that sold right after he passed away, and that like none of the proceeds of them really went towards my family. I think one or two of them we were able to kind of put back into the museum, but again, all the lawyer fees and stuff, it was absolutely asinine. So again, like if it wasn't for my dad, this wouldn't exist. Again, growing up with the art, it was art to me. I didn't care much for it, honestly. Like if I'm being honest, up until like recently, I was just like, I'd sell a painting and retire. I don't really care. Now, working here, like I literally want to buy everything. Like I want to keep everything. I want to buy everything. I would never sell anything. There's pieces that I'm not super thrilled with. I have my favorites. I have my least favorites. That's just how it works.
What is your favorite piece?
Oh God.
And your least favorite. I mean, since you brought it up, you might as well.
What is your...
So if I'm going to say least favorite that we own here, Judge Dredd. It was a Mad Magazine piece with Sylvester Stallone. Not my favorite piece.
I can see that.
My favorite that we own, Reign of Wizardry, which nobody even knows about. It was a super special piece to my grandfather. It was so again, all of his pieces, if he did it for himself, he would actually paint a background and like make it a very busy piece. And Rain is one of those pieces. It was his depiction of hell. And
okay, I know you're talking about.
Yeah, it was that one. Yeah.
Yep.
And Ellie never wanted it published because it was hell. And she was a very devout Christian, and she, like, my grandfather would paint her stuff for like for Christmas. Like he'd paint like Jesus and all this other stuff, and she always loved that stuff. But the fact that he painted hell, she was like afraid of it essentially, and she always said like, "This can't leave your room. I don't want anybody finding out about it." So, and then he also loved Fantasia. And this piece, I can't think of something on like whatever mountain, that huge like creature. This looked exactly like it. As far as like you could tell the influence, but it's such a gorgeous piece, and I like just the background of it, like growing up and seeing it every day because it wasn't allowed to leave his room. It has a special place in my heart. That one, Red Planet, is really good. Night Stalker, and then growing up, Dracula Meets Wolfman was always one of my favorite pieces. That one was one of my favorites because the background was complete. It was a super complicated, super busy background and super well done, which again was super rare for my grandfather. And then I found out recently his friend Roy Krenkel did the background, which is why it was actually a completed piece. There were a couple pieces like that. There was that Krenkel did. Gargoyle was one of them, and then Wolfman Meets Dracula is another. But I loved that piece. Kirk Hammett actually owns the original, that one. But yeah, so if I had to pick, Rain, I feel like is my favorite. I know my brother's, that's one of his favorites too. It's such an interesting piece compared to the rest of his. He never did a lot of gore. His nudity was very like not sexualized or anything. That's just what he did. Everybody was just like naked. Rain was the complete opposite. Super gory, super sexualized, kind of like dark and muddy.
It's a great piece.
Again, whenever people see it, they're like, holy shit, like this piece is crazy. It's so like, again, because you see Frazetta's stuff and it's like, oh, okay, fantasy and stuff. That's like, it's interesting. But you see Rain and it's like, this is a whole nother world, like a whole nother part of Frazetta that you've never seen. And it's honestly like, it's such a messed up piece. And it's so like, it makes me feel so wrong saying it's my favorite because of what it's depicting. But it's just like everything about it. And again, the story behind it. And my grandmother like never used to beg her to let, they would always like rotate images in and out of the museum. And that was one of the pieces that was never shown. She did not let it enter the museum at all. So yeah, I'd say Rain. Rain is up there.
I'm looking for.
I don't know. It's hard to pick too because he's done so many images.
Yeah.
That, like it's really hard to pick. Like you could say like, oh, what was your favorite like barbarian piece, or what was your favorite Death Dealer piece, or Rose piece? Then it's like easier, but there's like hundreds and thousands of pieces. I mean, my favorite black and whites, or favorite like oil, or favorite comic, or whatever. Like it's just like tons of them. But yeah, trying to think like if I was given every piece, I feel like so the issue with Rain for me is that when we got the piece, he was in the process of revising it. So a lot of his pieces, again, he would white them out. So Death Dealer 3 is underneath Death Dealer 3 revised. So he would take them and white them out and then redo them. Rain, he was in the process of doing that on the bottom like quarter of it. We were able to take the gesso off of it, and what's underneath is just very blurred. So it sucks that it like it's pretty much it's finished, but like it's blurry at the bottom.
Yeah.
If it was fully complete, 100%, that would be my favorite piece, like by far. But since it's a little blurred, it's hard to choose it versus anything else. But yeah, I think that's one of my favorites, like bar none. Rain of Wizardry.
Now, you had touched on this earlier, the fact that fantasy art is considered to be kind of in its own ghetto compared to fine arts. And as someone who's done some work in various levels in fantasy gaming and has worked a lot with various fantasy artists in various different ways, either in helping certain artists get with art directors and also modeling for some fantasy art. That's very much a problem that they deal with. Are you kind of surprised at how much, you know, a fine art person will go on for days about something that looks like a crayon sketch done by a 2-year-old on a wall as being this grand masterpiece, whereas anything done by your grandfather or Boris Vallejo or Brahm or you know, pick a fantasy artist of note as well, that's kindergarten stuff. Are you kind of surprised by that kind of snobbery and that those divisions?
So again, everybody to each their own as far as art goes. Art can be anything. Literally, again, a banana taped to a wall recently was like one of the biggest art things recent year.
Let's not go there.
And then there's Bob Ross, you know, God bless him.
Yeah, so I mean, it's in the eye of the beholder type deal. I am not much into fine art as far as like stuff like that. I'm trying to think. Picasso had his own style that I like seeing his sell for like 100 million or whatever the hell they sell for. He's had some interesting pieces, obviously, they all have, but like for the most part, again, it's kind of just like this one's red. And then people always say like, oh, seeing these in person, you'd be like blown away by it. I've never seen him in person, so I can't really attest to that. And again, art is literally in the eye of the beholder. It's whatever you think art is. If it touches you emotionally, then I think that's the most important part of art. It is not my thing. I think fantasy art and art like this needs to be kind of put up on that pedestal with those pieces of art. Because there are people who come in here and literally like break down crying, like seeing these in person. It does emit an emotional response. I think the other ones emit more because it leaves obviously literally everything up to the imagination. Whereas these kind of guide you towards something and hint at things, obviously. But I think that was the cool thing again with my grandfather's pieces is that a lot of them are very abstract. He has a subject and then everything else behind it is kind of like left up to you to figure out and to ask questions about, or to like fill in your mind. But yeah, even my grandparents, yeah, so that's Rain. Very gory, very not Frazetta-esque piece, but again, he loved Fantasia.
Yeah, you can see the Fantasia reference in that. That's
Yeah.
gorgeous.
And again, the bottom like quarter is blurred because he was whiting it out, which sucks. But like seeing a piece that he's done that is like complete like that and super busy and complicated is unbelievable. Like again, that's not him. That's not what he did as far as commissions went, because again, if you paid him for a commission, he didn't want to do a ton to it if he didn't have to. But pieces that he painted for himself or for family, always completed. Wild Ride, super busy. All his African pieces, super busy. Rain, crazy. His death dealers, for the most part, were very, like, a lot of them had a lot going on. But yeah, so Rain was gorgeous. But yeah, Frank and Ellie, from what I remember, it always sucked to them as far as like the fantasy art stuff goes, because fantasy art back in their day was like trash art. A lot of times publishers would take their art and essentially like throw it in the garbage because it wasn't worth anything after they published it. Or they'd quickly sell it for a couple of bucks and call it a day there. So honestly, my grandfather growing up was very like, it was a starving artist type world for him. Whereas you had, again, all the other guys, all the fine art or abstract art guys really flourishing. Usually after the time, though, I guess. Most of them, obviously, Picasso, you had to wait till after he passed away for stuff to get crazy popular. But yeah, I mean, for me, I think fantasy art is some of the most interesting. Abstract's cool, but I don't think, like you said, kind of like splotching something on a wall or like splatter painting something very quick should count. But again, because that's my
Jackson Pollock does nothing for me.
Right.
It's not my thing. I mean, it's a whatever. If like you said, it's all in rather than the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. Again, if it touches you, great. Yeah. Let's say, like, I'm not going to argue with that on it. Like, and again, it doesn't do that for me. But I've also, again, never seen the pieces in person, so I can't.
Right.
Well, how it make me feel, but
seeing like a jar of urine with a religious icon in it, I don't see that. But I mean, to compare something that's more apples to apples, I mean, you know, a naked lady painted by Rubens versus any of the naked female characters that your grandfather has painted, I don't see how one is I can see how you might prefer one to the other, but I don't see how one is definitively a greater value artistically because it was a nude Rubenesque woman versus a nude Frazetta woman who also happens to have curves and a voluptuous form and everything else without being, you know, being very sensual without being sexual.
That's not pornographic.
Yeah, it's so that's more apples to apples at least. But even then, that's completely dismissed. You know, so it's just.
My question was, so you meant as you were mentioning this, is there any of his artwork that you absolutely have to see in person, because having a photo, you know, online or whatever it is, just doesn't do it justice. You have to be there.
All of it.
To look at it.
I want to say all of it.
All of it, dude.
Makes sense.
When next time you're out here, we'll go out.
It is cool. Again, so you see them all. It's so hard to take a photo of one of his pieces, and like art in general, to take a good photo of it and then have it like through a computer screen look the way it does in person. You miss a lot of things. The actual, like, if I had to pick one, Catgirl is the best to see in person. I would say we can't. It's so hard to actually get like an accurate image of that because he put stucco on it and like thick oil paints and stuff. He would use stucco, clay, and like thick paints and add like a mossy texture to a lot of the trees and vines in Catgirl. So when we try to take a photo of it, if there's any light, it actually reflects the light and it takes away from the green in the piece. So unless we digitally scan them, which we don't feel comfortable taking a lot of these pieces out of the museum for obvious reasons. But yeah, you can never really emulate those pieces. But yeah, I think Catgirl is the coolest to see in person. Night Stalker, actually, I love Night Stalker. Seeing that piece in person is oh my god, that's its own like it's its own experience. So nobody really thinks of Night Stalker when you think of Frazetta. It's not a very popular Frazetta piece, but I feel like the image we sell the most in our shop, yeah, so there's Cat Girl.
Yeah.
One of the 5 provisions of Cat Girl. But Night Stalker, when people see it in person, I feel like that's our most sold image. One of our most sold images, because it's so like, again, pictures just don't do that one justice. He uses his masonite to kind of shine through the background a little bit to add a lot of the browns to his pieces. But yeah, so I'd say Cat Girl and Night Stalker would be my 1 and 2s. And then Rain, just because, again, you really can't, it's hard to find it. You can definitely Google it now that we're starting to make different things with the image Rain on them, but that's definitely a more rare piece to see. And it's obviously, we can't really put that on a t-shirt because you can't really walk around with that on your shirt without getting some very angry looks.
Well, I wouldn't care, but yeah, I would totally love it.
Yeah, some of us would totally do it. But
speaking of which, you got a new shirt on, right?
I do. So this is one of our. This is coming out. I just got our shirts at the printer. This is one of his Lord of the Ring pieces. So this one's Eowyn with the Witch King.
Yeah.
So these will be up on our website within the next 2 weeks, hopefully. They're screen printed on a nice cotton. Honestly, I've been wearing these shirts for like years. And I was like, let's try to screen print something on them. So they're screen printed and they're going to sell for $25 like the rest of our shirts. So still very affordable. Yeah. I think every size, even like 3XL, we're going to do at $25. So no increased price on 3Xs, which is very rare even for the rest of our shirts. But working, like doing these ourselves, essentially. We work with a printer in town that Ellie and Frankie used to work with. They're able to do it for us pretty cheap. So we're able to then keep the price nice and low and affordable. But yeah, it's going to be this shirt and then a Gandalf shirt, which both are super cool. And I've been wearing the hell out of them since I got them printed.
Cool.
Yeah. So I'm super thrilled about them. Again, there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline that I'm going to work on with my family. My parents never had like the warm bodies essentially to toss around or the help to do a lot of things. It was just essentially them. And now that I'm in there, my brother's helping me a lot with stuff too. I have all these ideas and I'm able to try things. They're very generous about letting me attempt things. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But for the most part, yeah. So these shirts are going to be, hopefully they do pretty well. Again, pretty much all the proceeds from these shirts, I'm going to announce that too. Like every shirt that sells, the profits will go straight towards our buying art back. Everything else, obviously, we put a little bit into the account or whatever after we pay everything else off. With these solely, I want to make it to where every penny we get from these goes towards buying pieces back. And like, it's very, again, we bought Lord of the Rings stuff. So we made a Lord of the Rings shirt to say like, thank you for letting us buy these pieces back. And it was so coincidental that the Lord of the Rings stuff came out when we just started. I made an advertisement for a Lord of the Rings portfolio. So that's been our bestseller recently. And just coincidentally, all these Lord of the Rings stuff came up. So I'm definitely trying to ride that train a little bit because they are gorgeous pieces that not a lot of people know about.
Right.
Yeah. So again, since we bought those, I thought let's do a shirt that shows Lord of the Rings stuff and put every penny back into the museum, which will be really cool. So yeah, I'm excited about these.
That's exciting. Are there any other projects that you can talk about, or is it all at the moment kind of in
There's
production?
one I can't. That one's gonna be really, really cool. I think there's 2 of them I can't really talk about. I have something that I'm working on again. I'm doing. Did I tell you about it? I'm doing a miniature.
You did. You were mentioning something about that. Yeah.
So I found a guy who did. So he had a Patreon, and for 1 month, if you subscribe to him, you got like a Huntress STL, so like a 3D model.
Yeah.
And I emailed him. I was like, hey, technically they're paying for it, so it's like not great if you're not being licensed. Do you want to work with me though and give me the file and I'll sell, like I will print them. I have my own 3D printer I bought to play Warhammer with my friends and we could print our own minis just to like practice painting so we don't screw up our like $100 miniatures. So, and when we play D&D, I could print like my own D&D guys. So I bought a resin printer and I was like, it's so crazy that at the same time I found this guy. So he sent me the file and I'm working on getting it perfected. So I'll be printing that and they'll be 3D, like they'll be resin printed in-house little minis essentially. And they're going to be very affordable because I can print them affordably. I'm going to do probably 3 different sizes. They're going to be a 28 millimeter, 75, and like a 110 or something like that.
Oh, nice.
A 4 and a 6 inch.
Definitely
6 inches. takes a ton of resin, but I think it's worth doing a 6-inch. I'm working on the kinks with it. The first rendition printed in like 20 different parts, and I didn't like that because gluing them together, you have to put like putty to make the lines, like to cover everything up.
Yes.
The second one I did in one full shot. The painting that would be insanely difficult because you had to have to paint underneath the cats and all that. So the third one, I just had somebody rip the models off of the base. I don't want to give away what it is yet. So they come kind of it'll be a 4-piece thing if you want it, or I could print it all together if somebody wants to, but it'll be cool. I'm excited for it. That's another thing in the pipeline that I'm working on.
Well, we'll have to have you on one of the paint shows, and you can paint Warhammer.
That'd be so I'd be so nervous.
Well, the best thing about it is we don't show faces. We just show the downward view of us showing the paint, doing the paint, and we just talk and just.
Are any of you really good to where we can just say it's me and then?
I got started painting back in 1987, and I stopped for a long time and just recently picked it up. And
you know what's crazy? Do you guys follow like any miniature painters?
Well, the one guy we paint with, Rollo Tomasi, he's a Warhammer. He's done actual shows, and he's actually a professional painter.
I was gonna say, so recently they had the what's it called? They had Adepticon where they're doing the Golden Demon and stuff, right? You guys know about Golden Demon.
Nope.
And this guy came in the museum, and it was one of the days that Heritage was selling art. So I was like, it was the day before, 2 days before I was bidding. So I was like glued to the computer trying to figure out how it all worked. So when it actually came up to the day where I was bidding, I knew what I was doing. And these guys came in, and we always ask people like, hey, do you want a tour? Or do you just want to walk around? And if you have questions, we're here. My mom always goes after us for doing that because she likes to like force tours on people, because it is cool. Like whenever they get tours, they very much appreciate it. But my friends and I are very introverted. If I walk in somewhere and somebody asks me if I want a tour and I say no, like I don't want a tour. But I'll usually walk around anyway and ask questions. But anyway, these guys came in, they said they didn't want a tour, and that was fine. I was already like doing something else. And they came up afterward and they were looking at some stuff, and I heard this guy's voice, and I looked up and I was like, is your name Sergio? He's like, yeah. I was like, you're Sergio Calvo, the guy that just won 2 Golden Demons. And he's like, yeah. I was like, no way. So this guy, and he was like, I can't believe you recognized me, because in all his videos and stuff, he never talks, he never shows his face. But like literally a week before he came, I watched a video on how to paint non-metallic metals. And like, that was one of his only videos where he like talked and showed his face. And he's like, you're the second person to recognize me. And the fact that it was a Frazetta is actually unbelievable. Like he was like, I'm going to cry because it's the craziest thing ever.
That's
so
awesome.
We're both sitting like, in shock because he's my favorite mini painter. And then my grandfather was one of his favorite artists. So it was like, it was the coolest thing. And yeah, so oh my God, that guy's crazy. If you ever see his work, he's the craziest dude ever when it comes to painting. He's so good. But yeah, he won 2 Golden Demons, and again, it was so funny and so coincidental that he was here, and it was like he brought another guy with him, and the other guy's very good too. But yeah, again, I feel like it's so hard for me to focus on painting. Like I'll do it. It's been like a week or two since I painted. But last time I tried, I went to my cousin and I always have like painting night. And I went to his house. I took my paints out and I looked at him. I was like, I don't feel like doing this tonight. He's like, yeah, same. So I drove an hour back home. I just didn't paint. I told my girlfriend recently too, I was like, make sure I draw for an hour a night, because like I like drawing. I like being creative. I've always had that about me. I just have never done it. Again, that was Grandpa's thing.
Do you have the procrastination bug too?
Oh my God. I think so.
That's good.
I have 2 very bad things I adopted from the Frazettas. It was procrastination and obsession. My grandfather obsessed.
2.
Yeah,
you're in good company with us. I'll tell you that right now.
I still remember. I brought it up to my brother the other day. He goes, "Oh yeah, the National Lampoon cover." There's this one image he did where there's a girl tied to a post and a guy shooting down at like African warriors or something for a national.
Well, I like it already.
I swear to God, he had that thing on his easel for years and just kept whiting the girl's face out. Like, and I brought it up to my brother and I was like, there was that one piece. He goes, "Yeah, the National Lampoon cover." I remember that. He obsessed over this girl's face. It was just her face that he just kept whiting out over and over. And it was just like he couldn't stop. And I get the same way with my stuff. Like I'll draw a face and be like, this is wrong. And I'll spend literally like 4 hours just trying to do like a nostril or something perfectly. Whereas when I watch other artists do stuff, it's like, oh, they could have done that better, but it still works. Like, still looks good.
Yeah.
So why, like, whereas for me, it's like, it gets to the point where it gets stressful. So I just stop. And again, about a year ago, I started drawing. It was the first time I ever drawn in my entire life. And honestly, the first time I ever painted was the miniatures. And after like a week, I actually, like, my progression was very, very quick. Obviously, I'm not a great artist, but from what I drew, you wouldn't think somebody drew that after like a week or two of their first time drawing. And then I just stopped. I was just like, okay, I'm kind of like over this.
You're like, I did it. I'm done.
Yeah, and I think the hardest part for me was like setting it up and like getting my tablet out or getting my pencils out. It's just like trying to convince myself to actually get into that and like to get everything ready. I just would like psych myself out and be like, oh, well, you can go play World of Warcraft or something instead. Like, do something else, anything else. But when I do it, I'm obsessed about it. I love to do it. But again, like, all I did for like a week was draw faces, just like heads. Like, do that whole Loomis style, where the hell it is, where like you draw a circle and then all that like the weird lines in the circle and start erasing things and doing different layers. And that's all I did. I did one female body. It was the first. I would follow like guys on YouTube and like follow their guides because I'm not my grandfather. I can't just think things out of my head. Yeah, essentially Bob Ross stuff. And I like David Finch was a guy I used to watch all the time on YouTube. Marzullo, I forget his first name, but he did a lot of guides, and I'd follow them. And I got very good. Copying something easy, thinking of things yourself and trying to like picture where things go, and all of that is very difficult. So whenever I can emulate somebody, it's easy. But yeah, again, I got good, but I can't. Like, it's so hard for me to actually do it. And my sister's very talented. I don't know if you flip through her book at all. We have like a tiny book with her stuff in it here. Oh. She barely draws, and she's very talented. Again, my father was crazy good at drawing. But yeah, so again, with like painting and stuff, I always get the paints out and I'm just like, I don't feel like doing this. Or I'll struggle on like one little piece and obsess about it and just be like, I don't feel like doing this again. Like thankfully, my friend has a ton of Stormcast units, and he wants my cousin to paint them. And I told my cousin I'd help just so I can learn different like paint methods so I don't screw it up on my guys. Yeah. So, like, that's the only reason I really like I will paint recently. I haven't painted any of my actual models because I don't want the armor to come out looking the way I don't want it to come out. So and non-metallic metals are so impossible to do, and I'm struggling with it. But again, like, I'll look at my grandfather's stuff and be like, he just did it so easily. Like, all this looks so perfect.
It's all in the ink wash and the shading. Yeah.
Yeah. No, literally. Yeah. Yeah. That's the other thing is I'm trying really hard not to use like washes and contrasts and stuff anymore.
Well, I'll tell you, I use the Army Painter's quick shade or quick wash.
Yeah.
That stuff is a godsend.
Oh, I know. Trust me.
You know, it's especially because I am not showing them off. I actually play with friends around once a month around the tabletop. So we're playing D&D. I want to use the minis. So these are all. I slap on a base coat. I throw on a little bit of shading, a little bit of wash, and maybe some dry brushing, and then I'll matte seal them, and they're done. I want them to be playable, so I don't really care too much. So that helps my discipline.
Yeah, no, for me it's like I don't care who sees it. Like, it was. I feel like my grandfather was the same way. He didn't care what other people thought for the most part. He cared what he thought, and that's very much how I am. Like, if it comes out and it's not right to me. I can't even ask my friends, like, does this look good? Because I don't care what they think. If it doesn't look good to me, it doesn't look good. Yeah. So, yeah, every time I look at it, I'm like, this sucks. And then I'll redo it and be like, oh, this is better. And, like, until I think it looks good, it's not finished, in my opinion. Like, I'll keep going back and screwing with it. So, yeah, it's so hard for me. Again, because I know when I start painting, I can't stop until it's, like, done. So it's, like, hours of stuff. I'm painting this like tiny mini, making sure it comes out so well. And that's the other thing that sucks is like I wish my grandfather was still alive. I'd love for him to paint my minis with me.
You could show him,
yeah. That'd be super interesting to actually see him paint those and actually have like Frazetta original miniatures.
Oh my god, that'd be fucking fantastic.
And that's the other thing. Like, I used to like LARP and stuff with my friends and having him. It would be so cool
Oh
for him
yeah.
to like, yeah. So it'd be cool to have him paint like my friends and I into a piece.
Oh
But again,
yeah.
there was never anything that we never. Again, I think only one grandchild ever asked for a draw something for them. It just wasn't something you did because we just didn't think about it. Like Grandpa didn't feel like painting. If you wanted to draw, like he would draw something, but Ellie would like to scoop it up for the most part. She was like, "This is one of his, like, let's go put it somewhere instead of kind of like losing it in your house."
This is one of my first wizards I did with the little the gremlin in the sack.
It's so small.
It's so ridiculous. And then I did these 2 Barbarian Brothers, which actually came out not too bad. It's hard to see.
Yeah.
It's really hard to see. Get the
painting stuff that small is so hard.
There you go.
I've been doing zombies and it's like impossible.
Right. Yeah. I think that's why I lost my damn eyesight.
I would say I use that like weird magnifying glass thing.
I've got one of those lamps. Yeah.
That's what I use. What's crazy about that guy Sergio is that he said he doesn't use any kind of magnifier. He just does stuff. Yeah, and he paints like tiny stuff.
Oh my god,
ridiculous! But
he must have like amazing vision.
Yeah, I don't know how the hell he does it, but my eyes would like burn after like 5 minutes.
Oh yeah. Well, when I first started, it would take me 6 to 8 hours to do one mini.
Yeah. Same. Again, I obsess and like I'll white stuff out and then go back and redo it and just do it until it's perfect. So
exactly.
It takes, I think my first painted ones were dire wolves, and those took me forever to do them.
Oh,
I hate having to glue them up. That's what the worst part is, actually building them.
I try to have a tendency to stay away from the ones I have to build more than 4 pieces.
Yeah. The Warhammer pieces are like 40 per. It's like,
I don't have the patience for that.
My army isn't really glued up because
I still have a pewter dragon from Grenadier, or Red Dragon, that it came in like 12 pieces, and I'm like, I just don't care. It's still in the box. It's just sitting there.
Yeah, most of my guys just lay on a base. I didn't feel like gluing them to the base.
Exactly.
They work.
Exactly. All right, we're coming up on the 2 hour mark. So I want to any questions in the chat before we wrap up and call it a night? I'm gonna ask Frankie any particular question. I know there were some in the chat. I didn't get a chance to take a look. Yeah. Death Dealer, Warhammer. Warhammer is called Plastic Crack for a reason. Yeah, it is.
That's true.
Here's one by Soup Bitchin. Had any musicians commissioned Frank?
Yeah. So he did stuff for Molly Hatchet. There was Death Dealer 1, Dark Kingdom, and Berserker were album covers. But it wasn't like a commission. It was kind of, can we use these images? Nazareth used the image Brain. Mom said and somebody else did stuff. And then Wolf Mother, which is a more like recent band, they did. They used Sea Witch on their album cover, and then they used Moon's Rapture for their single Woman. And then they used like a moon, one of his moons for, I think, Mother. They were super cool guys. I've been to one of their concerts. I think Kirk Hammett wanted to commission some stuff or just use some stuff, but the whole band has to agree on it, I guess, and not all of them were for it. But again, stuff like that. I'm trying to think. I know my cousins Tool just did stuff with my cousins, which I'm so upset about. I wish Tool would have come to us because I've been listening to Tool for like my entire life. I love Tool, but they just did a guitar and then they did like a tour poster and stuff. And that's actually the deal that's been eating me up the most recently. Because again, my parents didn't brand much. It's kind of like museum is what they cared about. They're very old school with business. And so my cousin did a very good job at branding. So I'm like, shit, I love Tool. So it was kind of a big hit to me, but yeah, as far as artists, I think that was pretty much, or musicians, that was pretty much it. We do have a couple people that always ask, but I mean, it usually depends for the most part. But what's actually funny too is that he never listened to any of that stuff. He listened to classical and Frank Sinatra when he painted. Not much of a metalhead.
I remember you saying that. Yeah, I'm the same way in the morning when they'll drive to work, just classical.
Yeah.
Those Molly Hatchet covers are legendary. And in fact, they've talked about the fact that the art sold those albums for Molly Hatchet, And yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No,
By
again,
the
they
cover.
chose very good images for their pieces. That's for sure, for their
Right.
album covers.
Chris, you beat us to the punch. I was going to talk about or ask about details of the museum, but here we go. Chris M. Vogan wants to know about details of the museum.
Depends what you mean by details.
Yeah, so give us some details, Chris, about your question. What in particular? Well, I'll reiterate one. Your tickets are $15 a piece, correct?
Yes. So it is $15 to enter, and that literally helps us keep the lights on. Property taxes here are not cheap in Monroe County, Pennsylvania. I mean, we pay literally like the average GDP of an American.
Welcome to New Jersey.
Yeah, no, it's not. And it's the crazy part because, and that's the other thing is we're not government funded, so we don't get any assistance at all. This is all like we have to find the way to pay for all of this to just keep it open. Okay, address. This is always funny because I always screw the address up. It is 141 Museum Road, East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. If you check out our website, frazettamuseum.com, and you click visit us, it has everything there. It might say Museum Lane. It's the same thing pretty much. It'll get you there. Just type in Frazetta Art Museum on Google. We are open 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Thursday to Sunday. So it's on the weekend. So everybody has breaks on the weekend. They can come visit. $15 to get in. Like I said, it's just a donation to help us literally keep the lights on here. Yeah, what's cool, I think we have, my dad got the most original oils out of all the other kids. He chose a lot of the pieces based off of like sentimental value. And a lot of the picks were like, if you choose a pick worth like 100,000, somebody else can choose two $50,000 pieces. That's kind of how it worked. So he was able to kind of get a lot of those. So as far as like singular child, he was able to get the most. I think we have like 39 original oils, along with a million sketches, prelims, comic book stuff, you name it. We have literally like, real quick, those are all art stuff, but like all those walls lined with stuff.
I specifically rented a cabin around about 10 miles away, and a 9-minute ride just so I could come out to the museum.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, and again, the cool thing about the area too is if somebody's so far away, especially in the summer, it's literally like a tourist destination. This is the Poconos. We have like, you could go kayaking, you could do like, there's tons of hiking trails. Like this is a great place to be for like a weekend. Yeah. So like come visit the museum and do whatever you want the rest of the weekend. A lot of people, I will say though, if you are interested in his art, make a day of it. Do not come at 3 expecting to get your like essentially not your money's worth, but expecting to get kind of the whole value of the museum. A lot of people will come at like 2-ish and be like, I wish you guys were open later. And sometimes we will stay till like 5-ish. But it takes hours to really, honestly, depends who gives the tour. My mom does like 15-20 minute tours. She's very to the point. I'll give about 45 minutes ish. My dad can go on for like hours. It depends how busy we are, but definitely try to get in here like earlier in the day so you can actually enjoy the art. And again, it takes so long to really look through things, but
I can confirm that. Yes.
Yeah, it
totally.
does. A lot of time, like I said, a lot of times people come in here and they're just like, shit, I wish I would have come a little bit earlier.
I'm just glad I live close by, so it's not that far.
Yeah, again, it's a really cool place to be, and not a lot of people know we exist. And like a lot of people at the convention I went to recently always said like, didn't even know you guys were still a thing. So we are still here. We are still a place to be and a place to come to.
One final question from the goddamn Bacon. What's up, Bacon? How far into the future do you see your style of art going for?
As far as my grandfather's stuff, I feel like it's only going to get more popular. I feel like it will eventually fall off. I feel like fantasy art right now is I feel like it's in its prime. Like everybody's a nerd. Everybody likes to do like nerdy things. Now it's cool. 10, 15 years ago when I was in high school, you would get like beat up for saying you played World of Warcraft. Like it was that recent.
Robert and I know all about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like it, even as recent as like 15 years, I remember like having to hide that I played World of Warcraft essentially because I didn't feel like getting picked on most of the time. Eventually I stopped caring, but still. It's definitely in its prime now. Everybody and their mom plays like Magic the Gathering, like Post Malone, who's
They're household terms now.
yeah. Again, like everybody knows stuff like that. So, yeah, like Chris said, as far as nerd culture is going to take it, like, hopefully it continues on like this. I think, like I said, right now it's really really getting popular, which is really again it's cool to see. I wish my grandfather was around to see this because he was popular. Obviously, he knew people liked his work, but not like this. This is like ridiculously popular compared to even when he was alive.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd be exaggerating saying that your grandfather had a huge impact on a generation, especially a generation of young guys that grew up in the late 60s through the 70s and 80s and were into fantasy and science fiction. I think
D&D
a lot of us,
all,
there were a lot of young men who wanted to look like the men in your grandfather's paintings and absolutely wanted to get the women that were in your grandfather's paintings. I mean, they were just.
I mean, it's cool because again, growing up, like having my own influences and my favorite artists and stuff. It's actually funny. My grandfather was never one of my favorite artists because he was grandpa. You know what I mean? Like I never really looked at his work, and I'd look at other guys and be like, "Holy crap, this guy's nuts." But yeah, I mean, we've had people that worked at Blizzard Entertainment who did like art for them. They've been here. They've like met us and being huge WoW guy. Just like, holy crap, I'm meeting these guys who are like art directors for Blizzard. It's like so cool because I grew up with Diablo and all that. So yeah, I mean, there's so many people that'll come here again, even Sergio or anyone who's an artist. They're just like, oh yeah, I like my grandfather's stuff, or like any kind of nerd. It's just like people that don't even know who he is. They're like, I've seen his stuff somewhere, or like it seems very like it's influenced a lot of stuff, and it really has. Like he was one of the first like real fantasy artists. He was the most famous fantasy artist, and still pretty much is, which is so crazy. Again, like it's so crazy to think about. Like that's my grandpa. Like it still is hard for me to grasp. Like grandpa was this guy. Like he had this much of an impact on so many people's lives. When to me he was a normal dude. Like he was just
he was the guy you had pancakes with on a Saturday morning.
Literally, no, yeah, seriously, or like ate popcorn or something with, or watched like a Mets game or shot. Like, and again, like he never bragged about it. He never spoke about it. He never said like, "Look how great I." Like it was never anything like that. So, like thinking of this like super kind, like genuine human being being like this huge influence and meaning so much to everybody, it's like so crazy to think about. Like that was one of my best friends growing up, and I never really.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
that's so cool. Yeah, what a great memory.
Yeah, no.
What a great memory. Memories, really.
Yeah, again, everybody always asks like, "What's your favorite memory with him?" And I don't have one because
all of them.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like we never went out and like did anything crazy to where it's like, "Oh, that was a great memorable event." It was always like I remember the same stuff, playing checkers. He would play checkers. Grandma would play chess, or like we'd have these crazy Halloween parties. Those are always my favorites. We loved Halloween here. Or just literally eating candy. He had a jar of candy we would just eat out of every day, and then like just basic stuff, like basic human being. Like there's no crazy memorable. Again, shooting guns. My first gun was shot with him. Stuff like that, but nothing crazy. It's so hard. Like somebody asked me that question recently, and I was so stumped. It's like I don't actually know because our memories were very like mundane because that's who he was. He wasn't super like eccentric human being. He was a normal dude who had this crazy talent and skill to paint. And like as a human being, you would have never thought that. Again, anybody who came across him in town, they were like, "That's Frank." Like my grandma used to like hide him from people because she knew that the mystery was gone because he was just a normal dude. He wasn't like this crazy guy that when you met him was like, "Holy crap!" Like this guy's so cool. He was just like a normal, cool, like
someone you could talk to.
Yeah. No, seriously, my dad said she would like hide him from people because she didn't want that mystery going on, like mystery being discovered. Like he was just like a regular guy.
That's right. You were also saying too that he didn't travel much. Like he never really left the area.
No, So he's had celebrities come here, like Clint Eastwood, Sylvester Stallone, George Lucas has been here, and he always told them like, "You have to fly to me. I just don't feel like leaving." And literally the only times I remember him leaving the property was if we wanted to get like Chinese buffet or to buy a camera. That was it.
Awesome.
you couldn't convince him otherwise. I think we went on a cruise. I don't even remember if he went on the cruise. My grandma did, but I don't remember if he went with us. He
Did he
just
do
didn't want to
did he
leave.
do conventions?
Very rarely.
Okay.
Rarely. If he was being paid a lot, I know he did a lot of stuff for L. Ron Hubbard. I talked to a guy recently who said he used to be paid tons of money to go like Scientology conventions and just like
shit.
show up and say hi to people. So he would always take that because he got paid to just say hi to people. He
shit.
wasn't a Scientologist in any sense.
Mhm.
But yeah, so yeah, they didn't really do conventions. Once they settled down here, the property was theirs. They didn't need to do much. They didn't want to do much. They just wanted to be not left alone, but they're just very private. Just like
Mhm.
didn't want to
Yeah.
be bothered type people.
Just like everybody else, yeah.
Yeah, and he
Yeah.
didn't. I don't think he liked being in the spotlight too much. That wasn't really
Hmm.
who he was.
Yeah.
He was a very spotlight person. I mean, he was talented in a million different ways, so the spotlight kind of always aimed towards him. But he tended to be very like reserved and
He
just-
didn't seek it out.
No, not at all.
No.
And again, he had like very few friends, and that wasn't because he was like rude or anything. He just didn't want to have a ton of friends. He had his family. Roy Frankel again was one of his like best friends growing up. My neighbor Kevin was one of his very close friends. He moved here. My Aunt Heidi moved away. He bought the house, and they became very close friends. Like us, obviously, he had Russ Cochran. I think was a good friend of my grandfather's. So a couple of dudes, but not. Yeah, again, and like none of them could convince him to leave the property. That was just who he was. He never. You couldn't. You know. He just never.
Yeah. I don't blame him.
Yeah.
All right, cool. If there's no more questions, we're going to wrap it up. Frankie, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This has been a blast. We've had so much fun.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me on. And it was a good time. Again, I always love talking about it.
Yeah, this is very cool. Very cool. All right. So I'm gonna in the show notes for the show, I'll put in some more details for after the fact for anyone who's watching later on, and then retweet some stuff out as well, so the people can find you and get out to schedule a visit and maybe stay in the Poconos for a little bit and hang out. So cool.
And again, if you're in the area, there's no reservation. Just walk in, like we're here. Just go in.
Yeah, that's what I did. Yep.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Excellent.
Cool.
All right,
Excellent.
Everyone. Yep. Thank you once again. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this, especially doing it in the museum. That's a nice
Yeah,
touch. Yeah. Yep. All right, TJ, do you want to take us out as usual?
As usual, guys.
Yes.
Pretty simple. Keep the lead shooting down range. Keep the wine flowing. Keep the fires burning. Don't take any wooden nickels. Don't drink all the rum. And tune in to next week's episode. Same time, same day, same channel.
Well, not same date.
What?
It'll be a different date.
Oh,
It'll be
same
the
day
same-
of the week.
And on that note.